Welcome, I'm Jan-Olof Sörensen for Academic Rights Watch, and I'm sitting here with Erik Olsson, who is chairman of Academic Rights Watch and also co-founder. We have started to do annual reports in English on video presentations in a more pedagogical format. And we've also started to translate some of the cases we have into English on the website academicrightswatch.com, which you are welcome to visit and read about the cases. So, first of all, Erik, would you like to say something about Academic Rights Watch and what we're doing?
Yes, so we are an independent foundation in Sweden, and we are monitoring academic freedom in Sweden. And we are doing this by documenting concrete cases where we had actually seen violations of academic freedom. And this is very much different from many other people who are also interested in academic freedom, but merely on a theoretical level. So we are also actually documenting the case by case. And we also publish these cases with documentation and everything on our website, mostly on our Swedish website, but now we also have this English website.
And on the Swedish website we publish all the documents, so there's full transparency on each case, so everyone can go in and form their own opinion about it.
Yeah, so unfortunately most of the documentation is in Swedish language, but in some cases you can use Google Translate, for instance, to have a quick English translation of some of the material.
And then we also file complaints with legal authorities where needed.
Yes, we do. So in Sweden there are several ombudsmen, and so one of them is the Chancellor of Justice, for instance, which is a governmental ombudsman. So sometimes we file complaints to this ombudsman, and we also write, of course, opinion pieces in media promoting academic freedom, and we also do other things that promote academic freedom in Sweden.
And give lectures and presentations.
Exactly, yes. So we're often invited to give talks on academic freedom and so on.
So we've been going on since autumn 2012, but this is 2017. Are there any new trends or any particular cases?
I mean, we always have some types of cases. So, for instance, there's always cases involving freedom of speech or violation of freedom of speech. So this is the most common case we look at. And so the typical case would be one in which someone has complained or criticized someone, or the leadership, for instance, and the leadership has reacted by some kind of intervention in that person's academic freedom. Might be that there's a threat of dismissal, for instance, because you have uttered or used your freedom of speech in a certain way. So that's a very typical case, I would say. And we had that kind of case this year as well in 2017. So we had, for instance, two cases at Uppsala University, which is Sweden's oldest university. And in both cases we had there were female academics who had their freedom of speech violated because they had criticized the way that the department is managed, basically. And this isn't always very positive because then you thereby threaten the leadership, and they consequently react by taking various measures. So these were actually two cases we filed complaints about to the Chancellor of Justice, and the Chancellor reacted by looking at the cases, of course, and also giving some criticism of the leadership, but it didn't go all the way to actually give a formal critique. So that was a kind of.
So we see a lack of the legal authorities correcting these issues.
Exactly. So there's a lack of commitment, I think, on the part of the legal authorities to actually do something about the state of academic freedom in Sweden, which is in many cases problematic. And it's partly because there's a lack of a legal framework. So there's of course constitutional protection for freedom of speech in Sweden, but you don't see a concrete legal protection for other parts of academic freedom. So let's take collegial governance, for instance. That's not something which is now protected in Sweden in the legal framework. But even in cases where you have a very good legal framework for parts of academic freedom, there's a problem with actually implementing that part in practice. So you often see legal authorities not reacting actually, although they could actually do much more given the legal framework that is actually in place. So that's rather disappointing. I think it's got back to a lack of a tradition in securing constitutional rights. You know, so it's there's not a tradition of individual freedoms in Sweden in the way it is, for instance, in the United States.
So there is a big gap between the legal framework, the constitution, and the actual practice taking place.
That's exactly right.
And what about new trends? Are there any particular new trends for 2017?
Yes. So this is actually rather worrisome because we see now new kinds of threats to academic freedom in Sweden. So one threat which we discovered in 2017 was the fact that at least one institution of higher learning actually introduced a web filter for the employees at the university. So this was the Karolinska Institute, which is Sweden's most famous medical school. So the idea was to prevent researchers from seeing all of the internet. And don't ask me why they wanted to do this, because it's rather mysterious, but that's what they actually did.
And that's something you don't really associate with Sweden. It's more
exactly, so it's you would associate that with completely different countries like China, or where they try to somehow shield off the internet from people, but you wouldn't expect that to happen actually in Sweden. But it did happen, and it's still in place as far as I know. And we complained about this to the parliamentary ombudsman, and unfortunately without any positive response from them. So this is now still in place, and it's actually extremely problematic, I think, from an academic freedom standpoint.
And are there any other new trends or characters?
Yes, we had one very strange case where we had a professor also at Uppsala University, who wasn't allowed to embark on research trips to other universities, for instance, in connection with conferences, even if the other university actually paid for the costs. And this was I found quite remarkable. And many of this professor's colleagues abroad also complained about this, and they wrote letters of protest to the leadership of Uppsala University. And so this was a rather extraordinary case, but it illustrates the power which university managers now have over professors. So they can even prevent a professor from actually going on research trips.
And travel bans on researchers is also not something you usually associate with.
No, that's extremely, I mean...
it's a new thing.
It's a new thing, yeah, it's a new thing. And you wouldn't think that it would happen in Sweden, but it does happen. And these are things that you only see if you actually document the actual
details.
Cases. Yeah, because otherwise it would be completely unknown to the general public if we hadn't actually documented this case. Nobody would have known about it, I think, apart from the people, the researchers abroad, who actually did protest.
And a third type of case is...
Yes, we had one very strange kind of case also, and it's about gender quotas for course literature. So the idea is to have a requirement that the reading list for a course should have at least 40% female author representation. So in other words, 40% of the course literature must be written by female authors. And I think that you might very well manage to put that together for a course involving only recent literature. But the problem occurs, as in the case in question, when you build a course on primary sources, on the historical sources. And this was a course based on literature from the late 1800 to 1900. And what happened in the end was that the guy who gave a course, he didn't actually manage to find enough female authors for the course, and in the end he didn't give the course. And this is a very remarkable case, I think.
And that was in the politics department here at Lund, in Lund University?
Yes, it was, yes. And the course was about fascist ideology from late 1800 and early 1900, and there weren't so many female fascist writers at that time, and therefore it was difficult to put the cause together.
And then we have a new trend also with restriction on the research you can do in some.
Yes, that's true. So we had one case at a smaller university in a small town called Halmstad, and there the impression was conveyed that people couldn't apply for external grants on any topic they would like to do research on. So they had to adjust to the research profile of the university. So if you was supposed to do something which didn't fit in well with the research profile of the university, then you were practically disallowed to even apply for the funding. And this was also a very interesting case, and something new. We haven't seen that before, but it's actually predictable given the situation of smaller universities in Sweden, that because they are too small to actually be a broad university, so they have to specialize somehow in something. But of course you can't do that by preventing people from who are at the university from doing certain kind of research.
It's a management intervention in the freedom of research.
Exactly. So the freedom of research is a very central academic freedom, and this was a violation, in our view, of the freedom of research.
And then there is another trend with ideological recruitment.
Yes, so we had one in Sweden, very high-profile case involving a senior lecturer called Johan Lundberg. And so he's a rather well-known Swedish public intellectual who has been critical to identity politics, and he has been critical to postmodernist theories and so on. And here he was applying for promotion to full professor. And it's also part of the history here that the postmodernism and identity politics are very popular at his department. So what happened then when he applied for promotion was that the two external experts, they both recommended promotion, but the board, the department board, then decided against promotion. And finally the board produced their own report in the case, so they actually produced a new expert evaluation, although the expertise wasn't actually in the committee, they were in the board. And in the end they declined the application for promotion. And I mean, most commentators have thought that this was on purely ideological grounds.
Yeah.
And if you look at the case closely, you see that all signs are in favor of that interpretation.
And for an international audience, it might be, we might just mention how the process is in Sweden. The application to a full professorship within your department is a possibility, and then there is it's exposed to external assessment reviewers within the discipline, and that's the process.
Yes,
and, here it's a violation of that.
Yes, of course, and in Sweden, if you have unanimous referees saying, recommending promotion, then in practice the whole thing should be decided, because the board actually cannot go against the unanimous referees,
No, and they are not usually within the discipline either.
Exactly. So and they should have extremely strong reasons to actually do something else than what the referees recommend them to do. And in this case, they didn't have any reason to think that the referees hadn't done a good job, for instance. So in fact, the board itself said that they had done a good job. So there was absolutely no reason to go against the referees in this case. So it's all down to ideological standpoint.
And this worrying trend about ideological recruitment, disregarding the merits and the professional merits, that has continued into 2018.
Yes, that's true. Yes, so we had a recent case involving one of the art universities in Stockholm, and what happened there was that there was a professorship in illustration announced, and one of the requirements was that the person in question who wants to have the position should be exercising what they call criticism in his or her produced work. And norm criticism is not just critical thinking in general. It's a very particular kind of criticism against particular norms, not other norms. So it's very close to identity politics and feminist theory and so on and so forth. And so our point is just, some of these things are perhaps good things, but our point is just that it shouldn't be the case that the university is dictating the political orientation of the professorship.
And even the art that person was supposed to perform was supposed to be norm creative.
Yes.
Derived from norm criticism.
Yes, exactly. So the idea was that you should just be knowledgeable about norm criticism. You should actually exhibit in your own artwork, and that you somehow really believe in it, and you actually want to promote that kind of ideology or political standpoint. So it wasn't just about having theoretical knowledge about what the norm criticism means, but much more than that.
So we have some new trends apart from the type of cases we've had since we started with freedom of speech infringements, and we have now a new trend. So one is we actually have a restriction on the information researchers can collect at some universities through web filters and censoring the internet. That's one new trend.
Yes.
Another one is what is called teaching freedom or Lehrfreiheit, which is now which we can say is not protected in law in Sweden, which it is in most other countries, including in Hungary even. But there we now have infringements on that, so professors can no longer themselves choose freely the literature and design the course.
Yes.
Gender quotas and things like that. And then a third thing is restriction on the freedom of research,
which is actually protected in Swedish law.
Yes, and nevertheless
still violated.
Still violated, and then there is a final trend, which is we now see clearly an ideological criteria for recruiting professors, which is unheard of before.
Yes,
and we also have a very weak support from the legal corrective institutions, the ombudsman, and chancellor,
which has always been the case. Since we started in 2012, we have had very little support from the legal authorities in our work.
So they're troubling trends.
Yes, in some cases we have to wait and see if there are actual trends, because we have only seen 1 or 2 cases of them. But there are, certainly new threats to academic freedom in Sweden, which we have documented fully on our website.
Is there anything else that you would like to add?
Well, I think I would like to emphasize that we are a non-political organization, so we are not. We don't have any special party political profile or anything. And sometimes we are mistaken for being some kind of right-wing organization, but that's not at all true.
Only recently, yeah.
Yes, only recently,
because we
quite few people. But the problem here is that much of the threat to academic freedom in Sweden comes from the left-wing. Part of politics, and of course we have to react to that threat, but we are not there by right-wing people, of course.
And in the start we had a lot of critique against marketization, market forces transforming the university.
So the other major,
and then we were,
exactly. So the other major threat to academic freedom in Sweden comes from neoliberalism, which is completely different part of politics.
And new public management.
Yes, exactly. So the new public management policy in Sweden is an extremely big threat, which basically means that you run state universities as if they were private corporates. So that's at least as big a threat to academic freedom in Sweden as the left-wing ideologies that we now see are
identity politics and
things like that are increasingly being applied in Swedish academia when hiring, for instance, for positions.
Okay, thank you. You can see our cases, some of them we will translate to English on the website academicrightswatch.com. Thank you for listening.
Thank you.